Hello, students. So this is a new lecture, and we are going to talk about cell physiology. We will talk about the cell membrane, the membrane potential, and from there we will get to understand about some important membrane feature, which is membrane potential. And these membrane protein are synthesized from gene expression, so we will also touch on that. So from this entire lecture, we will probably have 3 or 4 portion. Then hopefully you will learn about cell function, DNA synthesis, protein synthesis, and membrane protein and the membrane potential. So this is a typical cell that you will see, and just like any other mammal cells, the human cells, every cell has its nucleus. Nucleus contains the chromosome, so it contains the DNA. It has the gene to conduct gene expression. You also have a endoplasmic reticulum. Here you have the rough endoplasmic reticulum and also soft, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. These rough endoplasmic reticulum contains ribosome. The function of ribosome is to translate RNA into protein. And then we also have a Golgi here, Golgi complex or Golgi apparatus. The function of the Golgi is to fold or modulate the protein. And then here is a smooth. So here we said rough, this smooth. And then we have the mitochondria. The function of the mitochondria is to produce ATP. And there are several other like organelles in the cells. And here is the membrane. So what we see here is basically some like isolated compartment, several isolated compartments. You have the cell to separate these life from the environment. So you have the intracellular space, you have extracellular space, and in the cell, you also have different isolates compartment. You have this compartment that is organelle, that's the mitochondria, these compartment that is Golgi apparatus, and these compartment and these compartment. So you can see that everything kind of like separated and they have their own compartment. Then what form this membrane? What form this compartment? You have to separate this compartment from other compartment, right? So you have to have enclosed like a wall or like a capsule to separate them. And so that lead to a very important material to separate these. These are the membrane material. The membrane materials are all the same, whether that is the cell membrane or that is the organelle membrane, they are all the same. They are lipid bilayer. So we will look into that lipid bilayer. So this is lipid bilayer of cell membrane. You will have same thing throughout the entire cell and also throughout the entire different organelles. And they all formed by the same material, that is lipid. If you look at the detail about this lipid membrane, you will find that this lipid membrane has 2 layers. So one layer here, one layer here. This is called lipid bilayer. And this layer, single layer, is formed by this structure, this molecule right here. If we expand it, we can see that this molecule is called phospholipid. So this is the major, this is a simplified view to see this lipid bilayer. But you can see that the majority of these molecules are phospholipid. So a quick question can be that, what is the majority molecule to form the cell membrane? It's lipid. It's phospholipid. We also have some other different form of lipid here. We also have some protein attached to it. We also have some carbohydrate attached to it. But the majority of these components of this structure is formed by phospholipid. This phospholipid is very unique in the way that it has a hydrophilic head. It's formed by this phosphate. Uh, uh, and so this is hydrophilic, so it's very like to interact with water. So it naturally it will serve as an interface between the membrane and the water. This phospholipid has two fatty acid tail. These two fatty acids tail are hydrophobic. So this one is they don't like to interact with water. So they will face with each other. So you have two layers. Their hydrophobic tail will face each other, and they form the inner portion of this lipid layer. And so you can see that hydrophilic facing the water, hydrophobic facing each other, and then hydrophilic again to facing the water. So with these layers, it has these lipid contents internal, and the water are separated in two compartments. You have the extracellular space, you have the intracellular space. And again, you can apply this membrane. Is here extracellular space, intracellular space. You also can have the membrane to form this organelle, to form this organelle, to form these organelles. So these different organelles are formed by the same membrane. Yeah, so we basically use the same components to package our content, to package a nucleus, to package a cell. Inside of cell, you have small box to package different organelles. And in our society, we use cardboard box, cardboard paper, right? The paper to form this boxing. But in our biology, in our body, we use lipid to separate, to boxing this thing, separate this thing in different compartment. So that's that. With this membrane, it's very important to know that this membrane, the function of this membrane is to form this different compartment. And by knowing that it forms different compartment, one thing you can immediately understand is that they set a wall. This is a wall. These separate extracellular versus intracellular. And so with this wall, apparently, if you have the wall, people cannot get in, right? Your house has a wall, your room has a wall. So not everybody can easily go in. Not any particle can easily go in and out through this wall. So this wall serve a protection, a separation, the isolation. So things are different between these two compartments. However, we need to, so since this wall cannot separate two things, then what can diffuse across? The thing can diffuse across are something that's lipid, because this is lipid. So if you want to if there is a compartment, if there is a molecule that see this one, And because this lipid, they will go through. But other than that, other water soluble stuff cannot easily go through. So that lead to the transportation across the membrane. If we don't have any attachment, any other items on the membrane, if we only have this lipid bilayer, the only thing can diffuse through are those lipid soluble stuff. So we have something that can freely diffuse across. Those are either lipid or lipid soluble. For example, lipid will go through. For example, the steroid hormone. Steroid hormone are steroids. Those are cholesterol. They can diffuse across. There are some lipid soluble vitamin A, D, K, E. They can diffuse across. In addition, those lipid soluble stuffs, small things can diffuse across. Water, H2O can diffuse across. Gases, O2, CO2. O2, CO2 is also kind of lipid soluble because they are not water soluble. They are not very good at get dissolved in the water. They will diffuse across. So there are something can diffuse across. These we call them simple diffusion. Then you may ask, okay, they can diffuse in, they will also diffuse out. Then they are free to diffuse across. And then the net effects of this diffusion will be basically driven by concentration gradient. So the net effect, even though they can diffuse across freely, but in the end, we will see that the net effect is to diffuse from high concentration to low concentration, so that you have the net effects as an arrow like this one here. So you can have a free diffusion. And if you don't have anything, if we block, if we, I don't have a, if we just have these portion, then it's only free diffusion of that limited component. However, in our cell membrane or membrane of the organelle or membrane in the cell plasma, we usually call this one we call this a plasma membrane. Does it show here? Here, cell membrane. We sometimes also call this one plasma membrane, just to separate the membrane from the other membrane. All together, these are all called cell membrane. So all this membrane, in addition to just the membrane, the cell may produce protein, and that protein may anchor on this membrane. What kind of protein will be anchored on the membrane? There are several proteins can be anchored on the membrane, but in terms of the molecule transportation, the key protein to anchor on the membrane are transport protein. So, or membrane transport protein. So here are two types of membrane transport protein. One is just ion channel. So this is, I can probably type it. So for example, this we can call it an ion channel. So like this one is ion channel. Here we can have sorry. So diffusion component here, the components that can freely diffuse are gas, such as O2, CO2, water, H2O, vitamin, AD, A, D, A, E. Explain this one. And lipid, soluble stuff. The very common one will be steroid hormone. Yeah. So those are the material, the molecule that can free diffuse across. With this one, this thing is an ion channel, and this is protein. So when cells produce protein, how does cell produce protein? Cell produce protein from gene. Here we have the, sorry about that, let me just do it here. So here we have the DNA, which is part of the chromosome, and they are located. Let me see if I can have a, that's what I want here. They are located inside of this, what? No, not that direction. They are inside of this nucleus. So you have the DNA chromosome here in the nucleus. And then DNA, the gene, this one will produce gene. Let me type gene here. Sorry, gene. This one has a gene. Gene has a gene expression. You have the gene for your to produce different kind of protein. And one of those proteins, some of this protein will be anchored on the membrane. And those membrane protein, and there are many types of the membrane protein. Several of them are ion channel. So this is protein. Different cells synthesize different protein, and the different protein will perform the function for the cell. Yeah. So one of those protein are ion channel. So what does this ion channel do? Ion channel provide a tunnel or a channel for water soluble stuff to diffuse across. So you have opened up. Now in this channel, you don't need to worry about the lipid. You are water soluble. You are selective by this channel. You can free diffuse across. So these channels usually is very specific to particular ion or molecule to allow them to diffuse across. And so with this one, the difference between these and these is that these diffusions diffuse to allow lipid stuff, lipid soluble stuff to diffuse across. With this one will allow water soluble stuff to diffuse across. So because this is still a diffusion, the net effect will be from high concentration to low concentration. And with this diffusion, we call it a facilitated diffusion because we need an ion channel or a transporter to allow it to diffuse across. So that's that. Our cell membrane also have another way to transport molecule. And this other way is called an active transport. With this one, again, we need a protein, a membrane protein. This protein, very unique, synthesized from the gene expression from chromosome to from gene DNA to RNA. Later we will talk about that, and then to protein. And this protein anchor on the membrane. This protein is very unique. It can use energy. It use the ATP, is the energy fuel from the cell. You use it to pump. Just like your pump, you have to plug it on the connect with the outlet, electric outlet, and so you have the energy to do things, right? To push things. So with this one, it can pump one direction, pump the selected molecule to the other compartment. With this pump, you don't need to use just diffusion. You will pump stuff from the direction that you want it to. So even though you are pushing the molecules from low concentration to high concentration, you can still do it because you have the electric power, you have the ATP power. We call this an active transport. And so again, this one is selective. It usually pump water soluble, and it can push molecule from low concentration to high concentration. So that's the three major way that membrane, even though the membrane separate two compartments, membrane, separate two compartments, but there are things can still move across the membrane. They are either free diffusion, simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or active transport. And the difference between these three are these simple diffusion, you don't need any protein. But because you don't need any protein, the molecule has to move across lipid. And so they have to be lipid soluble. So you can see that the contents are very restrained, that you can only have these gases, water, vitamin A, D, K, E, or steroid hormone. This is gonna be the quiz question that which of following can diffuse across cell membrane freely. Those are the answer. And our membrane need some ion. Our membrane will need glucose. Glucose cannot diffuse across. Glucose is not one of these, but your cell need glucose. Your cell need sodium. Your cell need potassium. Your cell need calcium. Those are ions. Glucose are water soluble stuff. They need ion channel. So proteins are needed for facilitated diffusion. We also have active transport. This one require ATP. So that's that. So diffusion across the membrane. So just one of these. So that's this one here. Diffusion across membrane. You have these molecule lipid membrable, permeable, vitamin A, D, K, E, steroid hormones. They diffuse from high concentration to low concentration. You can also have facilitated diffusion. This one require a protein from a region of high concentration to low concentration. This allow water soluble, and this is selective. So depending on the proteins here, it can be either sodium, calcium, glucose, but they basically diffuse from high concentration to low concentration. We also have another type that is active transport. This one require ATP to pump the molecule from one compartment to the other compartment. Even though we may move things from low concentration to high concentration, we can still do it. But this one require ATP. So that basically is everything you need to know about the cell membrane. And the next thing is that we want to bring it to another very important molecule, another very important organelle, that is mitochondria. Because while molecules can move across the cell membrane, they across cell membrane through different ways. And in addition to diffusion, we can have active transport. And this active transport require ATP. And where do we get ATP? That is mitochondria, right here, mitochondria. So we will talk about mitochondria. Its role is to produce ATP. And this pump is just one example. This pump is just one example that our cell use ATP to do their work. So we will look into the mitochondria right here. So this is the mitochondria. Its function is to produce ATP. Quiz question can be that which of following organelles produce ATP for cells to use? That's mitochondria. So here is the mitochondria. How does mitochondria produce ATP? it's very important to know that mitochondria, how does mitochondria do it? Mitochondria do it by using the oxygen that you breathe in, and also using oxygen, and also using the food that you eat. The food that you eat, including carbohydrates, lipid, and protein. They will be converted into pyruvate. Pyruvate will be converted into acetyl-CoA, going through a TCA cycle. With this cycle, they have some products, including NADH and FADH2, and go through the electric transport chain, and that will produce a lot of ATP. And the byproducts of this process are CO2 and H2O. So you will produce some water, and also CO2, you will breathe out CO2. So you need to breathe in O2, breathe out CO2, you need to eat. And all of this basically will serve mitochondria. Mitochondria will return to produce ATP that your cell will then survive. Your cell need those. Your cell need that ATP to do a lot of function. So this is kind of like a collaboration between mitochondria and our cell. Mitochondria has its own DNA. So there's a theory that mitochondria may long time ago, before mammal cells are formed, mitochondria may be just another bacteria, but they integrated into the cell. It has its own DNA, and its function is to produce ATP so our cell can survive. And as a return, our cells will provide them with our cell form like multicellular organism, like human, like you, right? So you will go out, you will eat, you will breathe, and you breathe in oxygen, you provide us glucose to feed it, and it will produce the ATP for you. So that is like a collaboration. So that's mitochondria. What you need to know about mitochondria basically is that, okay, what's this? When we learn about biology or human biology or anatomy, physiology, or any like health related science, one concept, one mindset that you need to keep in mind is that you always want to know about when you learn a new term, you always want to know about its location and the function. So that's very important to keep in mind that you have to have that kind of mindset, location and function. So mitochondria, that's a new term. If that's a new term to you, then the first thing you need to know is that, okay, where is mitochondria? Oh, mitochondria is an organelle inside of a cell. Then what does it do? It produces ATP. So that's the location and function. So here is some detail about mitochondria producing ATP. Some key concept you need to know is that mitochondria produce ATP, it require oxygen and it require glucose. So you can have a lipid to serve to feed the mitochondria, but the first fuel that mitochondria will use is glucose. So this is a cell, that's a mitochondria. You will breathe in oxygen, you will eat, and you will digest, you produce glucose. In the cell, before the glucose get into the mitochondria, in the cell, our cell, before mitochondria enter, before we use mitochondria, our cell can conduct a conversion or glycolysis. This lysis indicates that is a breakdown of the glucose. We will conduct glycolysis in the cytosol. It's not in the mitochondria, it's like cytosol, to convert the glucose into pyruvate. And by doing so, you produce some ATP. So our cell can produce ATP without mitochondria. We call this process anaerobic exercise or respiration that you don't need oxygen. You can do it. And with this process, it's very inefficient. You only produce very few amount of ATP. The pyruvate can be transported into mitochondria. This pyruvate then go through the uh, citric acid cycle. Citric acid cycle equal TCA cycle. These two are the same thing. Go through the citric acid cycle, and that through this cycle, it break down this pyruvate to produce two important molecules, that is NADH and FADH2. Then this one will go through the electric transport chain to produce ATP. Through this electric transport chain, what do? We basically will produce ATP by this process. So basically that we will attach a phosphate to an ADP. What is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So it's a triphosphate. You have 1, 2, 3. You have 3 phosphate here. And to produce ATP is basically to attach a phosphate to an ADP. So this process basically is a phosphorylation. Phosphate, you want to phosphate it. Phosphorylation. Phosphorylate an ADP to form ATP. And in our mitochondria, this phosphorylation require oxygen. So we call this oxidative phosphorylation. This one will use oxygen to phosphorylate an ADP, then we produce an ATP. So that is how mitochondria produce ATP. It's a very interesting process, also very delicate process. And whenever you have this kind of delicate process, it's very nice to have this compartment to do its job. They are expert in it. This mitochondria is an expert of doing that. What we need is to just provide them glucose, oxygen, and they will use oxygen to do phosphorylation of the ADP and then to produce your ATP. So that's mitochondria. Yeah. So here is the some detail about this mitochondria. Mitochondria is an organelle that contains DNA. So you can see that it has the DNA. So mitochondria, in a way to say it, is like it's a bacteria. It used to be a bacteria, but it integrated into our mammal cells. These mitochondria is very unique that it has just like other bacteria, it has the outer shell, like this one here, the outer membrane. It also has an inner shell. This is the inner membrane, and there are space between inner and outer. So you have the intermembrane space. Maybe you can see here, that's the intermembrane space. And so that's very unique about this mitochondria. It has two membranes, outer and the inner membrane. The inner membrane, you can see that it has a lot of folding. This folding is called cristae. This folding, why do we need to have this folding? Because this foldings, this membrane contains electron transport chain. We probably don't talk about more detail about that, but basically you have these membrane in order to do their job to produce the ATP. What you need to know is that inside of it, you have the protein to synthesize to conduct the citric acid cycle or TCA cycle. The mitochondria has the chromosome of the DNA. So this is basically just very unique about this mitochondria. And when a sperm and the egg merge together to form the beginning of you, the mitochondria come from your mother. The sperm doesn't carry that much of the stuff. It only carry human DNA. And so the mitochondria basically are located in your in your egg. And so in the egg. And so when sperm egg meet together, the mitochondria will stay in the egg. And so your mitochondrial DNA normally inherit exclusively from your mother. So that's that. So this one basically summarizes everything you need to know about the membrane. So let's go back to here. This is a membrane. This is a membrane, right? Why is this component? It's phospholipid. It's the lipid. And this membrane has different transport mechanism. You have free diffusion, you have facilitated diffusion, you have active diffusion, active transport. And for the simple diffusion, you don't need anything attached to it. For the facilitated and active transport, you need membrane protein. For the active transport, you need ATP. And we describe where do we get those ATP. We get those ATP from mitochondria. So that is the membrane portion. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions.